Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk a little bit about different ways that you can draw in Inkscape, and then I will give you a demonstration of the basic parts of a shape, and then we'll just leave it at that, and then we'll get into specific shapes later on and how you can draw with shapes and some of the other tools, and we'll do that in subsequent videos. But for this one we're just going to talk a little bit about the different ways that you can draw. Now in Inkscape you can draw using geometric shapes, and these shapes have tools. There's a group of tools that allow you to draw geometric shapes. You have the rectangle tool, you have the ellipse/arc tool, the star and polygon tool, 3D box tool, and then the spiral tool. These tools you can use to create objects that are shaped. Now you can also use them in conjunction with some other commands to make non or more complex shapes, and I have a video on that on this channel. If you're interested in that, there's a demonstration that shows you how to create complex shapes using basic ones, and I just do a simple heart in that video because it's basically got two rounded sides, and then it's got some straight sides, and it's got an angle on it. So I show you one of the many ways that you can use to create a heart in that video. Besides the geometric shapes tools, you can use the path tools, which are like using a writing utensil on a piece of paper. And you can see there's, pen tool, there's a pencil tool, a calligraphy tool, and you can use those. Each of those have some different functionality. The pencil tool is really good for freehand if you're using a tablet with your computer, like a drawing tablet, a digital tablet. The pencil tool and maybe even the calligraphy tool, I don't normally work with one, so I'm not familiar with how that would interface with Inkscape, but I'm pretty sure that it would work. And if you use one, you probably already know how the tablet that you're using works. But at any rate, you have the path tools. This creates paths that you can then change the settings on to create objects. But there's some other ways that you can draw using Inkscape. One is you can start from a photo, or you can scan an image into your computer and then bring it into Inkscape and then use it. In fact, you can use any raster graphic, JPEGs, PNGs, GIFs. There's a whole bunch of different ones, but you can bring any graphic that Inkscape understands, you can bring it into Inkscape, and then you can use its tracing engine to trace it. So if you prefer to draw on just paper with like hand tools, you can draw whatever you want to draw on a piece of paper and then scan it and then bring it into Inkscape and then just have Inkscape trace your work. And it will it'll trace the thing you drew, and it'll turn it into a vector. So that's another way that you can draw. And then finally, there's some other features that let you create elements of a drawing automatically. And so those are the four primary ways that you can draw in Inkscape. And with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the basic parts of a shape or an object, or anything really that you put of a vector object, we'll say. Now I'm going to start with the rectangle tool just for this demonstration. This is not going to be a demonstration of how to use the rectangle tool. I'm just going to use it to talk about the different parts of a vector object. So I'm going to select that tool. I'm just going to drag out a rectangle, and you'll notice that we don't see anything. There's a box there, but I can't click it, and in fact when I try to click it, it goes away. Well, why is that? Well, it's because although there's a rectangle there, there's no fill, we haven't colored it in, and there's no stroke, which is the lines that define where the rectangle is, the outside part. So just to set the scene, when you have an object in Inkscape, it has a couple of different main components. It has the fill, which is like what you would color in using a marker or a crayon or a paintbrush, what you would fill in the object with. But then it has a stroke or a line that defines the edges of it. My version of Inkscape was set up so that there is no fill visible, and the stroke is not set to a color. And I did that on purpose because I wanted you to see what happens when your settings are like mine are right now. So if you look down here at the color palette at the bottom, I have green selected as the color, and I can even change that. It doesn't matter what color I change that to, you're never going to be able to see it because there's no opacity set. The opacity is set to 0, and you can see that down here in the definition of the color. See, I have this object selected and it's telling me, hey, this thing's filled with red, but it's 100% transparent. So because the transparency is set to 0, or the opacity is set to 0, you can't interact with it. Now watch what happens when I move around the outside of that rectangle. See how my cursor changes just for a second there? It turns into that 4-way arrow. If I click now, I can interact with that. And that's because there is a stroke. There's a stroke value, a stroke color set on this rectangle, and the stroke is not fully transparent. So let me show you in the panel over here what I'm talking about. The rectangle is selected right now, so what I want to do is if yours, I'm going to close these both down and just show you, if you have something like this and you want to get your panel open so that you can see your layers and then work with some of the other things we're going to use, just come down here to the bottom right, this little arrow here at the end of this toolbar, and if you click that, you'll get another bar that pops up that has some other tool panels in it. The two that we're going to use in this video is the layers and objects. So if you click that, it will open up this panel that I've been referring to, or that has been visible through this video so far. But now we want to open up the one that shows us what's going on with the paths and the shapes that we're using. And we don't have that right now. But let's say we wanted it. We could come down here and either click this like we did before, and we're looking for this one that has a piece of paper with a paintbrush. So we could click that and it would open it here. Or you can click this one up here that's already next to the one you're using, and then just find that same button in the list. This one you might find a little more practical because you can see what everything is. It's written out next to the icon. But if I click this, it's going to open that one, and it's also going to keep my other one open too. So now I can switch back between this one and that one pretty easily. If I want to see the layer structure, I can look at this one. If I want to look at the parts of a specific shape that we're working with, I can click this one. Now, if you don't have a shape selected, watch what happens over here when I deselect that shape. See, it doesn't know what fill and stroke you want to look at because you don't have one selected. And rather than try to find it by moving my mouse around, I'm just going to come over here to the layers and objects and select it that way. And then I'm going to come over here, and now we can work on this shape. Now you can see here that I have my color selector set to HSL, but there's also HSV, RGB, CMYK, HSLUV, CMS. There's a bunch of different options. I have a tendency for Inkscape to work in HSL. If you're going to be using it in GIMP or another photo editing program, if you're going to, you might want, and you're familiar with the RGB color definition method, you may want to select RGB as your color, or as your color selector type. I have a tendency to use HSL, but as you can see here, there is no alpha on this rectangle, and that's why we can't see it, and that's why we can't interact with it. I can't click on it. See, my cursor doesn't change right now, but watch what happens if I just add even 1. If I just take this to 1, you can't even really see that rectangle, but it's there, and because there's a value on it, when I point to it, my cursor changes, and now I can actually click it. So that's the first thing to look at. If you know you have an object on a layer but you can't interact with it for some reason, it might be that your fill is turned all the way down. So I'm going to turn this up so we can see what we're doing. And incidentally, before I do that, I'll show you one more thing. The stroke has a similar setting. And see, the reason why you can point to this when it has the stroke, even though you can't see the stroke, is because the alpha is turned all the way up. If I turn this alpha down, now I can't even interact with the stroke. I can't interact with that shape at all. And so check your stroke and your fill on your fill and stroke panel, and just make sure that you have a fill and a stroke. And what I didn't explain this, but your fill and stroke panel has these 3 buttons here at the top. You have the fill, which is the red part. You have the stroke paint, which is just defining the color of the outside of the vector, and since it's set to alpha right now, you can't see it, but you couldn't see it before, right? Even when the alpha's turned all the way up, you can't see it. Now why is that? Well, that's because of this other button, the stroke style. Right now, when we select this image or this object, the width of the stroke is set to 0. So you do have a color, you do have a stroke, you just don't have any, it has no width. But if you put a width on it and you expand this, there, see, you've got, and you can take that to whatever, whatever setting you want. The idea here is you have a fill and you have a stroke. The fill, you can just set the color and you can set the transparency level. And then the stroke, you have the color, you have the width of it, and you have the transparency. But you also have on the stroke, you have these other settings that we won't get into in this video. When we get into some other things later on, we might use some of these and just show what they do. I will show you that this one changes the look of the outside border on your object, so you can change that to dots if you want, and each one of these just looks different. If you wanted something like that, you could change it to that, but for the most part, I just use straight lines. That's just what I normally work with, but you can do some creative stuff, and I have in the past with these other things, so we may get into that in a different video. But for now, just know that your objects, no matter which one of these shape tools you're working with, and really, for that matter, any vector object in Inkscape is going to have these components. It's going to have a fill, it's going to have a stroke, and that stroke will have a color and a style associated with it, and your fill will have a color, and then it'll have opacity, and your strokes also have opacity. So that's the basic parts of a shape in Inkscape. And I'm going to take this back down to something a little smaller, or a lot smaller, maybe something like 1. So you can adjust that however you want depending on what you're drawing. So that is an overview of the different ways that you can draw, and it also I talked a little bit about some of the settings that you'll find on every vector object that you have in Inkscape. And one thing I didn't talk about is the difference between this. So when you're interacting with an object, if you click it, you'll see these arrows are all pointing outward. That means you're in scale mode. But if you click it again, you see they all change. See, the corners now are curved, and these are straight up and down. Those are shear handles. So you can shear that object, and if you hold down your shift key or your control key, which one is it? Actually, it's the alt key. The alt key locks it to a specific amount. So if you look up here at the top, you'll see that the height and the width change whenever I hold down the alt key, and they go up by a specific amount. It's incremental shear, basically. If you don't have alt held down and you do this, it'll shear a little bit at a time, but as soon as you hit alt, it snaps back to a certain interval, and I'm not sure what that interval is by default. But you get the idea. You can shear it this way too, same idea. That's how you would make a parallelogram. But the curved ones are rotational, so you can rotate your object as well using the rotation. And that works similarly. If you hold down alt while you're rotating, it rotates it in certain increments, but if you let off, it lets you fine-tune the rotation. So that's basically the idea of working with an object in using the selector tool, because when you first draw an object, it will look like this, and in order to interact with it like I just was, you need to go to your selector tool, and that will change it to this. Then if you want to rotate it, you click it, and that'll let you rotate it. There's some other stuff that we could talk about as far as interacting with these, but the only other thing I want to mention is that this is actually a shape it's actually a path. And if you want to see what actually, I'll switch to the node tool, and that changes us back to this. And then that allows you to interact with the nodes that define the object. And that's all I'm going to say about that in this video. In the next video, when we start actually using the rectangle tool and looking at all the different features, we'll get into some of the things that are unique to a rectangle. But I want to stick with the things that are common in all of these tools, and hopefully I haven't moved over into an area that only applies to the rectangles. But all of this bounding box, you're going to see it on any shape that you draw. and you're going to be able to rotate it, you're going to be able to scale it and resize it. And then there's even going to be this pivot point, or this center point, that you can move around, and we'll get into that in a video later on, probably the next video. But that's going to do it for this one. So again, we just talked about the ways that you can draw in Inkscape. We talked about using geometric shapes like we're showing here, and path tools, using a scanned image or a raster graphic that you bring in and then trace it. And then there's some other features that we'll look at later on that you can use to create elements of your drawing. And those are a lot more complex, and so we're going to start with the foundational information, and then we'll move into those as we get deeper into Inkscape. But that's going to do it for this video. And before I go, I just want to let you know that my channel is not supported by any kind of memberships, or I don't have a Patreon or anything like that. I primarily support my channel through my designs that are on marketplaces that you can get on t-shirts and products and things like that. So if you'd like to support the channel, maybe browse some of them. You might be able to see a design of mine that you think would look good on a t-shirt for you, or on some other product. I have a lot of different designs out there on different marketplaces. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope that helps, and thanks for watching.